engineering and social computing. In particular, he is working on the analysis and support of open source software development communities and collaborative systems in general. So today, he will be presenting to us a keynote entitled Writing Rebuttals and Response. So the floor is yours, Professor. It's a great pleasure to have you here with us.
Okay, thank you, Alison. And as Alison explained, I am at the Northern Arizona University in the US, but before that I was at the University of São Paulo, where I still advise students. And I learned a lot about how to write responses and rebuttals with a lot of colleagues, and that's very difficult. I'm very glad to share a little bit of what we learned over the years. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So to prepare this presentation, I'm sharing my own experience from my group. I also collected some advices from this blog post from Andreas Zeller. It's very good. A lot of people in the community knows this blog post. So when I start asking about advices, many of them pointed to this blog post. So I suggest you to read about that. And I also collect some ideas and advices from this colleague, Christoph Troid, Mauricio Nishi, Igor Steinmacher, and Anita Sarma. So Igor invited me to talk about responses. There are several types of responses. None, some conferences don't request you to respond. Rebuttals, revise and resubmit, and journal revision. I'm going to focus here on rebuttals. But first, I don't know if you know the difference between those. Of course, none, everybody knows what is that. You just submit your paper and you receive an accept or reject letter. You go to celebrate or you try the next time. Don't get sad because rejection is part of the process. It's quite common for everyone. Rebuttal, you have a chance to take a look at the reviews and answer the reviewers. You are not preparing a new version of your paper. You are just answering the reviewers. Most conferences ask reviewers to explicitly ask questions. So they need to put the questions there and we answer those questions and comments, etc. There is also like ICSI is like that, FSE is like that, CBSoft is like that. There is also the revise and resubmit. You have you get the reviews of your paper and you submit a new version of the paper together with a letter explaining what you did in the next deadline, like CSCW conference works like that. Similar to a journal. And there is the journal revision. The difference between revise and resubmit is that revise and resubmit, usually you get only one chance to revise and resubmit, while journal, it's very, very flexible process. It can go back and forth several times. The deadlines are flexible. You can ask for extension of the deadline. Usually the deadline is already, you have a lot of time to work on your response, like 3 months, 6 months, while revise and resubmit is usually shorter and you have a single shot. But rebuttals are really tricky because you are not preparing a new version of the paper, but you need to promise and answer the reviewers and convince them to accept your paper. And so before we move on, I'd like to ask a few questions. I'm going to post, not anymore. You have on the top part of this slide URL. I'm going to write here in the chat as well. I had to copy it, but it's missing. And you can go live and answer those questions. So I know the audience and your experience with rebuttals. So the first question is, do you know what a rebuttal is? Or did you know that before my short explanation? Okay, it seems that most people know, but we have almost 1/4 of the audience that don't know. Great, I'm going to go over some of details. So to have a better idea, how many rebuttals have you ever written? Okay. Like almost half have never written, but we have some well-experienced people here with more than 4 rebuttals. And for those of you who have written a rebuttal, what's your feeling? What's your experience with rebuttals? Okay, so we have like very negative experience, some neutrals, and it seems that just one participant is very happy with rebuttals. Most are neutral or sad with rebuttals. And that's a match what I feel when I talk to people. A lot of people don't like rebuttals. They think that it's worthless. It doesn't save papers. But my experience, both as an author and as a chair of conferences, I see a lot of papers moving from reject to accept, and vice versa. Papers that would be accepted, they move to the reject side after the rebuttal. So it really can change the scores of a paper. So who had experience with rebuttals moving your paper towards positive scores? Like you were able to make reviewers to sway to the positive side. Okay, we have 1, 2, 3, you see. We have experiences. My own experiences says the same. Not, of course, rebuttals can't save a paper if the reviews are really critical and they see deep problems in your paper, but indeed rebuttals can swing the reviewers to one side or to the other. What about to the negative side? How many of you had a rebuttal, and after the rebuttal, the paper moved or the scores moved to the negative side? Yeah, you see, you also have experiences, reports of that. And what about neutral? How many times the rebuttal didn't change the scores of your paper? I think that's common. At least for me, that's common. We spend sometimes a lot of time doing a rebuttal, but nothing changed. So it really depends of the paper. So we have all over the place, no single trend. The point is rebuttals can change or not the scores of the paper, but it's an interesting opportunity to save a paper that you have. So let's explore that. So what is your difficult problems or concerns related to rebuttals when you are writing a rebuttal? Or imagine that if you want to write a rebuttal, if you have never had the opportunity, what are your concerns about that? Issues, incorrect. Reviewer, yeah, that's great. That's exactly what you should address, the reviewers. To convince haters. Yeah, haters are a problem. Those are hard to convince. We are going to talk about that. You face a hater, and no matter what you say, these people will hate the paper. But in that case, you should arm the supporter of your paper, because if you get someone that really likes your paper, they will fight in favor of the paper. We are going to talk about that. Okay. More problems, comments, how to explain, reviewers that don't update their comments. Yeah, that are big concerns. So let's go through some of those. And if you later, if you still have questions or concerns, we can go back during the question and answer part of the talk. First thing, let's understand the process. Mainly for those of you who have never written a rebuttal, it's part of this submission. So I'm getting ICSI next year as an example. So those are the important dates for this conference. First, you submit the abstract of your paper, then you submit the PDF of your paper, and then a few months later, you have this opportunity to answer the reviewers. And it's a very short time. You can see that's November 10 to November 13. Usually they give you just 2, 3, 4 days, at most 5. It's the most that I have ever seen. So the idea is not to do a whole new analysis, is to answer the reviewers. And then notice that they will have almost 1 month to give you the answer if they accept your paper or not. So what they do in that 1 month after you answer them, they discuss. There is a lot of discussion after the rebuttal. So they will take in consideration your rebuttal in the discussion. Even if they don't update and don't say anything, it seems that it was worthless, but they will. And if they don't, the chair will probably, in a serious conference, make them discuss your paper and ask them if the reviewers change their opinion. And if the chair is really good, they will say explicit things like, okay, you are complaining about sample size. The authors answered about that in the rebuttal. How did that change your opinion? So they will go very specific, and the reviewer will need to explain themselves. If the reviewer has a good point, like the sample size is really bad, they will probably reject your paper anyway, but they will discuss that, and the other reviewers will have the chance to manifest themselves. So if you are lucky, you have a very good reviewer on the positive side that will fight for a paper. And I'm talking about lucky, and that plays a role because there are 3 reviewers. So you can get haters, you can get good reviewers that fight for papers, and you can get the I don't care type of reviewers. Whatever you do, you can accept or not this paper, or you will not fight in favor or against. There are all types of reviewers. So you need to try to understand reviewers when writing the rebuttal, okay? And if you're lucky, you get accepted, and then you have the camera-ready paper after a few months again. So the first thing to write good reviewers is understand the process. I just briefly explained what happens under the hood. This year for the ICSI reviewers, the chairs prepared this really nice slide deck, and they shared with the community. Here's the link, and you can take a look to see what kind of instructions the reviewers received for ICSI. And I got some parts here of the document that talks about response. That's our focus here. So you notice that you have access to very few data deadlines, but in between, a lot of things happen. Like after you submit your paper in September 3, the chairs will assign reviewers, and then they have like a first deadline where they have to submit half of the reviewers, then more reviewers, then they have a quality check, so reviewers can see the reviews from each other and the chairs as well. The idea is to avoid discussion at that time, because they still need to have your input as the author response, and then they will discuss if they accept or not. So that's what happens afterwards. They have a period for discussion and decision where the reviewers and the meta reviewer will talk to each other. Then they will have more discussion for the papers that need it. They eventually can assign new reviewers if there are no consensus. The area chair can jump in and moderate some discussion, so you have a new pair of eyes looking at that. And then they have the chair meeting where all the chairs will meet and they can look at your paper as well. So even if you have like a supporter and a hater in your reviewer set, and the paper is still undecided, you have more pairs of eyes to look at your paper. So if you do a good job on the rebuttal, you can escalate, and the decision can be made with more people and more people. If you are right, you can swing your paper to the positive side. Okay. So first, also let's understand the scores. Your paper can receive accept, at least in ICSI, and other conferences are similar, but it can receive accept, weak reject, or reject. So some conferences don't like the borderline. So here they ask reviewers to be on the positive or negative. Weak accept and weak reject is a signal to you as an author and a rebuttal writer, because if they say that they are weak accept or weak reject, it means that you can move their opinion because they don't have a strong concern. Many, if they are on the weak reject side, maybe you can try to move the person to the accept side. If they are reject, they can be a hater, or they can have a really good point that they see a serious concern with your paper, and that may be harder to move. So you may try to address the other points. Okay. So the scores give you a good indication of what the reviewer is thinking and if they can move or not. So here are the instructions that the reviewers also receive on how to consider or how to write the review. The chairs ask them to explicitly ask questions and explicitly state what are the critical points in your paper. So you can focus. You should focus on what is critical. In the rebuttal, you don't need to say, okay, I'm going to fix that typo. I'm going to change the caption of that figure. That's not going to make anyone change their opinion. They trust you that you're going to change those if the paper gets accepted, because that are very easy fixes. You should address the serious concerns, those that reviewers may have doubts if you are able to change that for the final version or not. So the reviewers are also asked to put the more important questions first. They not always do that. Sometimes they put it in order of appearance. So sometimes the most important question is number 3. And as an author, you want to address the most important first, because that's decisive. And as I mentioned, more people will look at your paper, not only the reviewers, but you have a moderator of the discussion, you have the area chair, you have the general chairs, everyone can look at your paper, your response. So you want to put whatever is important first. If the pearl is hidden in the mass of the text, like in the end of the rebuttal, they may not see the most important thing. So always put what is important first. So you have the chances of the other reviewers, the area chair, the moderator, they will look at that, because usually people start top down, okay? And reviewers are also instructed to not ask questions if they don't feel the need to. If they don't have serious concerns, they don't need to ask a question. So if you don't receive questions, that's part of the process as well. But theoretically, at least when I'm writing my reviews, I think, how can I change the opinion about this paper? What would make me change my opinion? And I ask a question so that the answer will make me change my opinion. If it's something that, okay, regardless of the answer, I won't change my opinion about that, so I don't ask the question. I ask questions that will make me change my opinion. Some reviewers do that, other reviewers don't, but they are instructed to do so. Okay. So that's also part of the instructions. Authors will focus on the questions that reviewers ask, the weakness that the reviewers point in the review or factual errors. So that's what the reviewers are expecting in your rebuttal. So you can answer the questions, but you can also point to errors that are in the reviewers, like, okay, the reviewers misunderstood this point, what we meant is this or that, and we will make it clear in the paper. So you can give explanations to clarify something in the paper. Okay. Okay. And how do you write this response? In the reviewer, in the submission system, you have a special field where you can put your answer. Some conferences, they allow more, they usually put a limit, but they allow more words than or characters than that limit. In some other conferences and systems, they don't. I would say that most don't. For example, CBSoft don't. You have a limit of characters and your response must fit in that limit. But ICSI, they also give a limit, but they allow you to go overboard. Usually to put references or some additional information that the reviewers may see, may read or not. They can disregard if they want to. It's part of the instruction. While you do not have to read more than the first 750 words, you certainly can, but they don't need it. So the important information should be within this limit. Okay. Questions so far?
So, Professor Marco.
Yes.
We have a question here from Ricardo Job, and he asked if somehow open science could help us with the rebuttal process. There is some way that you could provide us some insight regarding this issue?
Yeah, I don't have experience with open review, so I'm not sure, but in an open science, you can have more discussion, I think, and more people can jump into the discussion and make contributions. So I think it helps with the problem of having just 3 reviewers and the reviews will be more exposed. So I think it helps in that sense. If you have a hater, for example, that can be a less of a problem because first, the person will be less willing to be too critical or too negative or needs to have too negative just because they want to be negative. Because if they see serious problems, they will state that. But some people say, okay, you did not do a good job on the abstract, so I'm rejecting this paper. Yeah, if you didn't do a good job on the abstract, you can fix the abstract, not a reason for rejection. And that thing, I think, would be less relevant and less frequent in open review. So maybe that can help. So the serious concerns will appear, more people can contribute, and that can be part of this going back and forth. So yes. Okay, so I show some examples just to illustrate that indeed it can help with changing the score of paper. This was from ICSI 2018, a few years ago. We received all negative scores at first. And then after the rebuttal, we were able to change one negative to a strong accept. And the paper got accepted. So probably this person was able to convince the other reviewers as well. And they were weak reject anyway. Weak reject means that, okay, I will not fight against it. If you want to accept, okay, I'm okay with that. But most probably, I think during the discussion, they said, okay, I can accept that, but they didn't change the score. So even if you don't see the score changing, doesn't mean that the reviewer didn't change their opinion. And most probably here, we've changed their opinion. So how to sway the opinion of the reviewer? So for example, how to achieve that? You receive all negatives, even in ICSI, that's known to be very critical. We were able to get a paper accepted after the rebuttal. Well, first, understand the reviewers, understand their view, understand their philosophy. For example, understand if the reviewer thinks with a quantitative mind or qualitative mind, and is reviewing your paper that doesn't follow that pattern. Try to understand the importance that the reviewer gives to different aspects of the paper. Try to understand. That's the first thing, understand the reviewer. Don't understand you're going to be mad probably with the review because they misunderstood something or they gave importance to something that's not the main point of the paper. But learn to listen, learn to not react, learn to respond. Okay, that's the first thing. So respond, don't react, listen, don't talk, and think, don't assume. Okay, that's the key. If you have a good understanding of the reviewers, and sometimes you need to read in between the lines, some things that are not explicitly said that, but you need to think why the reviewer would say that, what the person was thinking when they wrote that, what's been in their head. If it's a good reviewer, it will be there, but not all the reviewers are good. So you need to know how to manage all of them. And it's a single shot. You don't have the opportunity again. It's a single response, and they will discuss your paper, and that's it. So you need to prepare very carefully. So how do you understand? That's the first step. What we do, we copy and paste the reviews to a document, usually a Google Doc, so we can share with the other authors. And we read it multiple times. First time, just read it through without getting worried about how to fix the issues, how to answer the reviewers, just understanding. The first time, just to have a feeling, okay, this is in our side, this is not in our side, just a general feeling. You can add a few comments, and then you read it again, now adding comments, making hypotheses, thinking and discussing with the other authors what the reviewer had in mind. Not how to answer, but understanding the reviews. Okay, and then you discuss with the other authors to reach consensus about what's written there. Sometimes a little bit cryptographic, like you need to parse multiple times the text because some reviewers are confusing. They talk a little bit weirdly. Mainly if they are not native speakers in English, it can be a little bit convoluted. And some people are convoluted. So you need to parse and read it again, discuss with the other authors what this person meant when they wrote that. We do that very often and collect more opinion and discuss until we reach consensus. What's the information that's there? And then when we extracted everything and analyzed and parsed the reviews, we try to organize. Okay, those concerns are related to the motivation of the paper. Those concerns are related to the method, to data collection, to the analysis, to the conclusion, to the format. We try to categorize and group the questions and the concerns. So here is an example of one rebuttal that we were writing. So we put those categories here. We put numbers to the reviews. We highlight things that are important, and we try to group in topics. So we go back, we mark what are the positive things, the serious concerns that they have. So we go there parsing and parsing. When we have a good understanding of what's there, that's the analysis, we go to design. Then we move to counteract. Then we move to think what we should do to address those concerns. So first, you need to prioritize, identify what really matters, and focus on that. So back to the case study, we got a ICSI paper accepted, even getting all negative results at first. How did we do that? How did we do that? We focused on the motivation of the work. That was the main concern that we identified from the reviews. And we spent like a good part of the rebuttal. As I mentioned, we have limited number of words. So this paragraph is a lot. Usually you don't spend that much in an answer because you don't have that much space in a rebuttal. But we identified that the reviewers will not, they wouldn't see value in the paper if you didn't convince them otherwise. That was the main concern. We had 2 reviewers that explicitly asked questions about related to the motivation of the paper. And the first reviewer in that case also had concerns. So we gave a very careful explanation with real examples like references for that point. And the other points, the other questions, you see that it was just a single sentence or just a couple of sentences saying, okay, thank you for that, we will fix, regarding this, we will do that. So very, very short answers because we didn't have space to go deeper. So deciding what can change the reviewer's opinion is critical when writing your rebuttal. And here, I think we got it because we focused in one thing and the reviewers changed their opinion. They got convinced that the paper was important to practice. And that was something that people have the needs in practice. So that got our paper accepted. Another case study, this was FSE last year, 2020. And we also got it accepted and we were able to change one of the reviewers. We had overall positive, but I've seen even with overall positive at the beginning, the paper getting rejected. If the reviewer 3 complains too loudly, and if you don't have a strong reviewer, if the reviewer 2 gives a strong accept, if it's not a strong reviewer that will fight in favor of your paper, and reviewer 3 starts to speak too loudly against it, it will get rejected. So we focused here on changing the opinion of reviewer 3. How did we do that? First, we noticed that, again, motivation of the paper was a point, because not only for reviewer 3, but reviewer 1 complained a lot about the motivation. So we wanted to bring reviewer 1 to more positive side to see if they would fight for our paper as well. So again, we spend a lot of text here. That's very costly to spend text in a rebuttal to talk about who is the developer population that's likely to benefit from this study. That was an explicit question. So we spent a lot of time there. Actually, it was reviewer 2 that was the strong accept. So even if you have one that's already a supporter, give more munition to this person so that this person can use to fight for your paper, okay? So we gave him a lot of information to help fight for our paper, and we carefully addressed reviewer 3 that was on the negative side. Reviewer 3 was complaining about a specific phase of our study. The person liked phase 1 and 2 and give compliments, but criticized phase 3. So what we did, we said, yeah, phase 3 is important. Papers usually don't do that. We did. So the main contribution is phase 1 and 2. So why we said that? Because even if they say, okay, phase 3 is terrible, but we are saying our main contribution is phase 1 and 2. We are giving one step ahead of most papers that just stop in phase 1 and 2. We were building a theory, and we also evaluating this theory. And so that's important. Okay, the evaluation is limited. We only use the students with a very small sample size, so far, so on. And we will tone it down. We are going to reduce the importance of it in the paper, but we think that this phase is important because this and that. And it worked. The reviewer were convinced. The last case study, it was ICSI this year. We submitted 2 papers. Both had 2 positives, reviewers, and one strong reject, and the other one a weak reject. We thought, okay, this one, we have a good chance. We just need to flip the weak reject, and it was a single complaint that the person had, and this one would be more difficult. But at the end, paper 1 got accepted, and paper 2 got rejected. Let's see why. Paper 1, why it got accepted? We identified the champion, the person that would support. In that case was reviewer 1. And we strongly supported his or her suggestions. Like the person was talking about satisfaction with motivation. We agreed, we said that we do that in the paper. We gave more details. We read the papers that the person suggested. So we pleased reviewer 1. And reviewer 3 were complaining strongly about our sample size. So we tried to disqualify that issue, saying that, okay, the sample size was enough. That's another lesson learned. In the past, we were trying to say, okay, we are going to increase the sample size. Then you get rejected, because what's going to happen? The reviewers will say, okay, good idea. Go there, increase your sample size, and submit your paper elsewhere when you have the new results. Because if you collect more data, you invalidate all the results that you have in this paper. So do that and submit it again. So you are asking to be rejected. So instead of saying, yeah, we are going to collect more data, we try to convince that we had enough data. And we gave some evidence that we collect the 200 plus answers in a survey. We said that it was larger than most software engineering surveys, so that was not small. We said that the kind of analysis that we were doing, like the feature exact test, it's okay with that sample size. But it's always good to say that reviewer has a point. Even if we are saying that the reviewer was wrong here, we said, yeah, we had one sentence that was misleading. So we were correcting a little that. So we said, we will fix that. That's another good practice. Always fix something in the paper based on the reviewer comment. And try to make it small. If you're going to say that we are going to fix changing half of the paper, again, paper rejected. Because they'll say, okay, so fix that and come back next year. So we're going to fix that, clarifying this paragraph or adding a sentence here and there, just to say that, okay, the paper is good, only needs small fixes, but always fix something. Okay? And it seems that, or we were able to change this strong reject, or the person said, okay, I moved to at least a weak reject, and you can accept the paper if you want to. The score didn't change, but I bet that during the discussion, these reviewers said that they would be okay in accepting the paper. In ICSI, I doubt that they will accept with someone pushing so hard against it, unless more people were jumping in and seeing, as I mentioned, it can escalate. But based on what we received of feedback, probably this person agreed with accepting the paper. Okay. And what about paper 2? It got rejected. And why? The only weak reject reviewer had a single question, and the only complaint was about the numerical analysis that we did. And one of the suggestions that this reviewer, the only negative reviewer, did was to remove that. The question was, would it be possible to either remove this analysis and fill the space with more details of the previous analysis, or improve the execution of this analysis? And we said, yeah, okay, we are going to remove that. Indeed, that was weak and not the main contribution of the paper. We are going to remove that. We will drop this analysis and a table. What happened? Big change in the paper. At the end, they said that, yeah, we discussed, and the decision was what would remain in terms of contribution if you remove that. So we are going to reject your paper. It was a suggestion from one of the reviewers. We just thought, okay, we have 2 positive reviewers, and the only complaint of the negative was about that analysis, and the negative suggested to remove. We agreed with the reviewer about removing it, and the paper got rejected. Lessons learned: don't make big changes in the paper. Don't promise big changes in the paper in the rebuttal. That's not the goal, okay? Okay, so if you promise big changes, you're going to receive that. Okay, try again next year. Make your big change. I think it's important, but go back and try it again. So moving forward, first, you need to identify the reasons for rejection. If it's in the science of the study, if the reviewers have big complaints about the method, or they are saying that, okay, you collected the wrong data for your research questions, that's harder to address because you need to convince that you have the right data or the right method. It's difficult. But most cases where you can change the opinion of the reviewers is about the paper itself, like the motivation or the level of details of the method, something that's not clear, explanation, why did you use technique Y or Z, the format of the results, like why did you present it this way or that way, or some limitations that you didn't acknowledge. Those are easy fixes. Those are easy to change the opinion of the reviewers. So if the reviewers' complaints are mostly about the paper itself, it's easier to convince. And again, don't promise to change whole or to drop whole sections of the paper, but tell the reviewer, okay, we're going to add this, put in the rebuttal what is the explanation that's missing, and say, okay, we're going to put that explanation in the paper. If it's about the science itself, it's harder. It's possible, we did that, but if they have serious concerns, sometimes it's harder. Okay, so I try to identify the type of concerns. Then I'm going to move faster in some advices. I can share the slides later. And most of them are based on the blog post anyway. And most of them I have already talked while giving the examples. So identifying the champion, identifying the hater, identifying the detractor, or identifying who you can swing, who you can change the opinion. Those are the first step. Have the PC chair in mind. So again, put the most important things on top of your rebuttal. If you think that the 3 reviewers messed up, you still have hope. You put that explicitly in the beginning of the reviewer, very politely, of course, in the hope that the PC chair will ask another reviewer to you, okay? So you still have hope. It's very rare. I've never had that situation, but I've heard other people that had. Anyway, first things first. The important things go on top of your rebuttals. And be specific. One Christoph Troyd, when I asked what your main lesson of writing rebuttals, he told me that I see a lot of papers getting rejected because reviewers say, yeah, the authors didn't address my concerns. And it happens. I saw that a lot, and I already did that. When I was a reviewer, I said explicitly what were my main concerns, and the authors answered something else or barely touched that. So I said, I'm keep my opinion because authors didn't address my concern. So be very specific, address the reviewers. They have the last word. Chairs will ask the reviewers if they change their opinion. You are not there to fight for your paper. So address the concerns. And chair will ask the reviewer if, okay, you are saying that they didn't address your concerns, but I'm seeing here that you complained about sample size, and the authors spent like a whole paragraph just discussing sample size. So can you be more specific? So chairs or other reviewers will fight for your paper. So write for the committee, choose your comments wisely, prioritize, find what are the major concerns, organize your rebuttals. So even if two reviewers ask about the same thing, you don't need to answer twice. You can put in the same answer for both reviewers. Make it very objective. Make it worth every single word that you put there. And try to convince them otherwise, okay? And again, always be polite. I have seen, as a reviewer, papers that got rejected because authors were very rude in the rebuttal. So the reviewers will say, okay, we spent like 4 hours reviewing this paper, writing the review, participating in the discussion, and the authors don't see value on that, rejected. So always be polite. Even if you think that the reviewer didn't understand your paper, is a hater, always be polite. You have hope if you are polite. So don't pick a fight. Again, be polite and try to acknowledge if you really think that the reviewer has a point, reviewer is right, you are wrong. It's okay to say, yeah, I agree with you. We are going to change the paper to address this issue. And always say, we are going to change the paper in this and that way. So the reviewer is convinced that you know what you're talking about. So in one case that we had, the reviewer said, yeah, this theory that this paper is proposing is too similar to this other theory. We could just said, we are going to clarify the differences. But the reviewer will say, but do you know what you're talking about? Do you know what the differences are? So we explain in the rebuttal, okay, we acknowledge that the two theories are similar, but our theory is different in this and that way, and it's useful in this and that situation in which the other one is not. And we are going to clarify that in the paper. So we showed to the reviewer how we are going to clarify that in the paper. So we convinced that reviewer. And so that was not a problem anymore. But again, it's okay to acknowledge that the reviewer is right. Okay. If you're writing for ICSI, as I mentioned, you have a limit. It's okay to go overboard, a little bit over the limit. Reviewers don't need to read that, but you can put a delimiter saying that, okay, this is the word limit, and you can put more stuff there. So if the reviewer asked, what happens if you do this analysis? You can do the analysis, put the details on the end of the rebuttal, and say, yeah, we did this analysis and it didn't change the results. We did that for this last MSR. The reviewer suggests to use another technique to improve the results. We used the technique in the very few days that we had to answer the rebuttal. And we said, okay, thank you for the suggestion. It indeed improved in 2% the results. Doesn't change our conclusions, but we are going to update the numbers in the paper. And that's okay. If it changed completely our results, probably the paper would be rejected because, again, substantial changes are not welcome in the rebuttal. But as we did the additional analysis and showed that didn't change that much the result, it improved, but the conclusions were the same. The discussion of the paper would be the same. So it was okay. The paper got accepted. And last advice is don't expect too much. Rebuttals won't save all your papers, but it can make some of your papers to go from negative to positive. So it's worth investing time. And should you always write a rebuttal? No. Some papers, we receive the reviews and say, yeah, those guys have really good points. We won't be able to convince because reviewers convinced us that our paper was not ready for publication. So yeah, it's better just to redo the analysis, redo the paper, and move on. Don't even need to write the rebuttal. You can just thank the reviewers and just give up. Don't spend too much of your time if you concluded that it's not worth it. Okay. And just to finish, the talk would be about author responses. I focused on rebuttals because I think that's the most difficult. Because if you are in a revise or resubmit or journal revision, you change your paper and you tell the reviewers, this is the new paper. So it's different. Rebuttals, you need to convince. You don't have the new paper. You just have your answer. So it's way more difficult to do. So that's another topic of conversation, talk about journal reviews and revise and submit. And how to learn more, participate in the process. Participate as a reviewer. I learned a lot seeing the other side, seeing my colleagues discussing a paper, what matters to them, how a paper got accepted, how a paper got rejected, what happens under the hood. So reviewing papers helps a lot to learn how to write your own papers and how to write your answers. And that concludes the talks. There's a lot of advices, I know, but I hope that I cover the main topics and I can make the slides available. And you have this blog post that has more details of many of those advices. And I'm open for questions.
So thank you, Professor Gerosa. It was a really great and important talk. Discussing this subject is very, very valuable to us, especially the ones that are in the beginning of the career. And we have here 4 questions from the audience and 5 minutes until the next section. So the first question, Ricardo Job asked about your opinion if the conference would leave this rebuttal process open to the community. And according to him, this process could help the authors by providing a guideline of errors that can be avoided, especially for the ones that are young researchers.
Okay, the question is the slides or the rebuttals from the conferences? I think it's more the rebuttals, right?
Yes.
Okay.
If the rebuttal process would be able to be open to the community.
I like that idea. As you know, conferences don't do that yet. Maybe with open science, they will start doing that. That will be a learning because you can point to your students and say, hey, take a look at the whole discussion and rebuttal from this paper. That will help you learn how to participate and write your rebuttal. I like the idea.
Yeah, of course. And so we have another question here from Lavinia Paganini. She asked, how to write a rebuttal when the concern is not applied for the method? For example, in a qualitative research with the sample size.
Well, that's very common. I always point to some references just to say that it's not me that's saying that it's not applicable. I point to some authors, some books that says that, as I mentioned, this sample size is okay for qualitative studies. I point to some examples. This is common in other papers, ICSI papers that also do the same. So it will be harder for the reviewer to support the opinion against the other reviewers saying, yeah, I still think that they should interview 100 people. If I point to other ICSI papers that interviewed 5, 10, 15 people, I'm giving concrete examples of other people that did otherwise.
Yeah. And Tayana Ochoa praised the talk. She highlighted how interesting it was to see this talk with real-world examples. And she asked if, in your experience, do you face it any case where the rebuttal made you change your grade from reject to accept, for example? And if so, can you elaborate on what made your change?
As a reviewer?
Yes, as a reviewer.
As a reviewer, yeah, I saw it happened very often because I do my homework. As I mentioned, when I'm writing my review, I think, how can I change my opinion?
Yeah.
For example, if something's not clear in the method and I have serious concerns, is this reliable or not? I will ask the question. For example, if it's a qualitative study and you have no detail in the paper about how the analysis was done, was just someone that randomly interprets that, or did they follow a systematic approach with more than one researcher and discussion? I ask that, for example, what was the process for the qualitative analysis? If the answer is, yeah, one of the authors read the data and wrote that section, reject. If they answer that, no, we followed a rigorous process with card sorting, we had 2 researchers, we compared the analysis, we reached consensus, we spent like 2 months just in that analysis, okay, that's an accept. So yes, it happened to me.
Well, a last question here from Aldrin Fonton. He asked, how do you see the importance of a rebuttal to the community sustainability,
Oh, I think that's really important because I saw as a chair, a lot of good papers being saved because of the rebuttals. So a lot of people think that rebuttals are worthless. And I saw it saving many, many papers because sometimes it's like the example that I gave. Because of the lack of details in the method, for example, I have serious questions about the validity of the results. But after the explanation of the authors, I got convinced. So it saved a paper. And if you save a paper, you saved like that paper that would be rejected to be resubmitted. And then you have 3 more reviewers looking at that paper. So it's better just to accept it, it's worth it, and save the paper. It saved the effort of the whole community.
Yeah. So thank you again, Professor Marco Gerosa. It was a pleasure to have you here with us. So the next section will be shared by Nicole